are people whose career titles require them to work in dangerous positions every single day. I mean, for right now to be relevant, like if you're an ICU COVID nurse, you're in danger every freaking day, but you're doing it for a greater purpose and you got to do it. Somebody's got to do it. People that work in labs, BSL-4 labs with dangerous, deadly viruses, Ebola, like that's a dangerous job, but you're doing it and you are qualified to do it. I think that's an important factor, that you're trained to work with those things. Accidents do happen, but at least you have the training, the education, and then you're going in knowing that that's a risk you're taking. Everybody has their own right to say, okay, I want to do something dangerous and I'm taking full responsibility for wanting to do that. So I don't think that's an ethical problem there. But in terms of ghost hunting, like, what are you trying to get out of it? Is there a greater purpose for society, and is it worth the risk? It's like a risk benefit thing that you have to look into. Or are you just trying to be a person that, like you said, like pokes the bear for no reason and for entertainment purposes? Because if it's for entertainment, that's not in goodwill, good spirit. If it's for money, it's not in goodwill, good spirit. But if you're legitimately trying to learn about these things to figure out if there is some sort of explanation, is there a way to, for bad spirits, is there a way to kind of successfully coincide with them and, like, I don't know, just like make hauntings better so that people can coexist better? Or are you just doing it for other reasons? I don't know. That's just my input on it.
If I can add on, with the whole like training and everything, I don't think people should be really allowed to interact with known malicious entities that could harm you unless you at least know how to like I'm a pagan witch. There's this thing called shielding. So unless you know how to shield yourself from that, or you know how to like properly dispel of those things. But then there are other places like in Gettysburg, there was a trip with Keystone this past summer. Well, fall-ish. I went and it was like you just sat in the basement of this haunted eatery and inn thing, and they told you ghost stories. And all of the ghosts there, I think, were very sweet and they like helped people. And I think that if you're just going there just to see it, that's fine. But if someone has like a very haunted necklace that will kill people, don't let other people near it.
Yeah, I'm feeling you on that.
The devil's advocate on that one is a lot of people, I know I'm not a believer of this, but you know, you take what's going on right now, people still don't believe that. So even if there is a dangerous presence, people don't believe that it's actually dangerous and they want proof. And only with proof will you get the satisfaction of people may or may not be actually afraid of these places. And I think a lot of the issue with the topic of ethics of, you know, ghost hunting and whatnot is the ethics of anything. It's the publicity of it. I mean, at my work right now, there is I think it's either a Life or Discovery magazine, and it's like the world's most haunted places, and it's a full $14.99 magazine chock full of, you know, haunted towns, haunted hotels, haunted this, haunted that. And it's like, what is the purpose of this magazine? Is it just supposed to be, you know, oh, it's a fun read, or, you know, it's just interesting to hear about the stories behind it? Or is that enticing people to go, hey, let's go take a couple beers and let's go hang out here? Like, no matter what, whether it be education or no education on the actual topic itself, I feel like you're always going to run into the issue of you're going to have those who respect it and stay away, and then others who want to challenge it, because that's unfortunately just the fate of the human race. Our curiosity kills the cat, or we realize, hey, we only got 9 lives. We're going to keep it that way.
I mean, this is going to sound horrible, but if you don't respect it and people gave you warnings that you'll be in danger if you do this, and you go poke the bear anyway, it's natural selection at that point.
I totally agree with you. But the one thing is, I think in regards to paranormal, there need to be more experts that come out and do this in a more controlled manner. Just like kind of like a study, like make it more formal, have a goal going in, preventative like measures in place, like you said, like the protective shield, and then have, okay, if something goes wrong, like we have a plan for that. There has to be a lot of planning involved. And anybody that wants to say, in my experience at least, all it took was one person doing the wrong thing with the spirit for that thing to be friggin' provoked for a long time and to cause a lot of damage to people, not just the person that provoked it, to everyone around them. So, I mean, you can't control everything. You can't control what some people are going to do, like Amanda, pick up that magazine and go, oh, let me go to this haunted place and poke around. Like, people are going to do that. You can't control everybody. But in terms of the professionals that are doing it, I think some of them need to be held more accountable for their actions, because you know what you're dealing with and you know that you're not dealing with them fully appropriately, and you should be. If you really want to do it ethically and leave people without harm, you need to think more about what you're doing than just, oh, let's go do this. No plan.
And that's the thing. Like, I agree with what Lee is saying about, if you fully walk into this fully aware of what you're doing and you decide to do it, like, then it's like, karma's on you, you know what I mean, with whatever happens to you afterwards. But the stories that we hear and experiences that we've had, there's like a fallout in diameter around the person who's done the provoking. So like those people all did not make those poor decisions to poke. It's just like, with what's going on now with the virus, it's just like, Amanda was saying, if they don't see it, they don't have the proof, like they don't care. But even those people can still harm others. Whether you believe that it exists or not, the virus exists or not, you still have the ability to harm others by, not wearing your mask or, being too close to people or whatever. So that's where, for me, the ethics come in, where I just would not have put people in that museum ever. I would not have, and the other part of it is that, when you say you're praying over people and protecting them, how do you know that you've done a bang up job? How do you know? You know what I mean? Like, how do you know you didn't forget an ingredient or you didn't leave a space, or, you know what I mean? Like, how, when it's something that you can't see and you're just feeling, and it's a lot of faith and just believing, then how can you be sure that you've, like, hermetically sealed somebody in protection? And when you're dealing with stuff, sometimes of this magnitude, how can you be so kind of either naive or arrogant to think that you did a perfect job at protecting everybody from something that you really can never be sure how powerful or not it is? Does that make sense? Like, if you're going to open a door, I really hope you're 10,000 years old and you know exactly what's behind the door, because if you're not and you don't, then you don't know what's behind the door and you don't know what could possibly come through and what kind of damage it could do.
And there you go. Does the door close just because you died?
Right.
I hope we can measure these things some days. Like, come on, science, let's go.
Yeah.
Well, that was like one of the things I was gonna say, like we were talking about, since we're talking about ethics and like money and things, if we want people to legitimately study this, they're gonna need funding, like they're gonna need money. But the problem is, and it continues to be a problem, like a lot of people, every time I think about Ghostbusters and Bill Murray's character, and he's a parapsychologist, and they're like kind of running out of funding because everyone's like really, dude, like you're just holding up cards and people try to tell you what's on the other side and what scientific merit do you have to do this? And it's like, that's literally the whole point, is we're doing these tests to try to find some type of evidence, but it doesn't help if you're not making money. So like in terms of the museum, it's one of those things where it's like, would they have been able to do that? Like, I don't know exactly what all they were doing, you know, before they became so esteemed in order to get money to go to these places and do these things. It becomes like this weird thing after the fact. Like, first of all, why do you have all that stuff in one place? Why do you have all that stuff in one place? And to my knowledge, I know some of that stuff was warded, so that way, like, if somebody did decide to taunt or bump into something, it was okay. But not everything was. Like, from my understanding, there's just stuff like on shelves, just not in anything. So there is really nothing stopping them from like, oh, I'm letting somebody pass, let me accidentally back up and back into this shelf, and then stuff falls on me and it touches me, and the next thing you know, I'm having a horrific accident 3 months down the line. Like, it's a weird place, I guess. The only thing I could think of in my head to equate it to is like, in my school we had this entire cabinet of donated preserved animals, and like one of the things was the only person who was allowed to take stuff out was like the teacher, because it was like a liability if somebody dropped a jar of formaldehyde with a turtle in it all over themselves. Isn't it kind of the same thing? It's like a liability if somebody goes into your museum of haunted and cursed objects to then accidentally touch one. Like, do they make you sign a waiver?
He
Like
didn't.
one of those things.
That's really interesting, because I think under any other circumstance it would be a liability, but because this hasn't been proven and technically the stuff doesn't,
Right.
they don't
That's
have to
the
worry
problem.
about part of it. However, I remembered a couple things. One thing was that in talking to Chris, and it'll be really interesting when we get to ask him the questions, he indicated that, you know, he didn't necessarily work exactly in the same way as his grandparents, and didn't, if I'm interpreting this correctly from what he said, that he didn't quite see eye to eye on every single thing. He had tremendous respect, of course, and learned everything from them. But he didn't necessarily follow the exact same path or thoughts on stuff. So I would love to ask him about this. But when we were there and we were standing in the yard, it's like a big wide open yard behind the house, and there was like a dirt road that ran. It was like a cul-de-sac that ran from the front of the house all down the hill, along the side, around the back, and back up. And that's how they had everybody parked like nose to butt of the cars. And then you went and they did a little mini like ghost hunt in a cemetery near there that Ed was buried in. And then you went and ate dinner at an Italian restaurant, and Lorraine could sign your books if you brought books or whatever. It was very sweet. It was really cool. But we didn't go in the museum, so they let us go down into the basement to see their artwork and come back up the same way. And we just stood out by our car, and we were watching and waiting for everybody to come out the screen door of the museum. And we see the priest going over the door with, the entire time everybody was in there, with one of the incense dispensers, like the bucket and the metal incense dispenser, like chanting prayers. And there was a rooster in a cage outside the door too.
What kind of Santeria priest?
I think the roosters are a watchdog. I think they're a spiritual watchdog, because there was one in the kitchen too. And I'm going to ask that question because it's killing me.
Because that's like,
They were like well-loved roosters, like nothing bad. Nobody ate the roosters. Nothing bad ever happened. There's pictures of her petting the roosters. Like, they were pets. She loved the roosters, but they had
If it crows, you're screwed.
So we hear them talking. We hear the priests talking to someone. I can't remember whether it was Tony Spare or not, but there was a haunted Bible. I don't know whether it was a satanic Bible or just a Bible in general. And they were talking about the Bible had gone missing, and now it was back. Like, it blipped out and blipped back in over a period of days or weeks. I can't remember. But I remember we were just looking at each other like, oh, I'm so freaking glad I didn't go in that freaking museum. There's no way. I'm so glad. I don't want to be any part of anything like that at all whatsoever. But for what you're saying about the money, they started out. They started their own landscaping business, and they worked up and down. I believe the East Coast. That's where they made their money, doing landscaping. And it was that during that they, and this was in one of their books that I read, during when they were doing that, that's when they would just, you know, start strolling around the neighborhoods that they were in, and Lorraine would sense that a place was haunted, and Ed would set up his easel, and she would walk up to the door. So this is like, I think 60s or 70s. And she would walk up to the door and say, because she was very sweet and charming. So she would knock on the door and say, so my husband and I were doing a landscaping job up the road or whatever, and we just saw your house, and I just noticed it, and we're wondering if anything weird has ever happened in your house. And then the people would be like, how do you know? You know, and yeah, actually, and if you would sit and talk with us for a minute about it, like, we're just really interested in this stuff. If you would sit and talk with us, my husband will paint a portrait of your house for you in return for you sitting and talking with us. So that's how they started. They were like ghost busting, you know, like a bunch of teenagers in the beginning, just because they were interested in it. Lorraine had skills, Ed had experiences, but not skills. And they would just go and ask questions, and that's when they would start to see the patterns. And then gradually, like, if you watch the documentary, it explains like exactly what point in their lives they got kind of catapulted to the media, and it wasn't intentional. And then when they got to that point, they realized that they could use this as a tool, use the media as a tool to educate. So that's what that was about. So they would just, the only thing they took money for in their paranormal work was if they did lectures. And I feel like that's valid. You know what I mean? If they went to a college to do an educational lecture and they put pictures up and talked about cases without naming people. And then they would, if travel expenses to help somebody, then they start, all their work came from the church. Like, people would contact them individually, but people would contact the church. And if the church thought it might be legitimate, they would contact the Warrens and ask them to go investigate. And they had a whole list of things that they had to prove, that they had to have evidence of before the church would then, you know, grant a priest to come out or whatever. So they really didn't, you know, they used their landscaping job. That was their bread and butter. And then, you know, lectures were something that they got paid for. They probably got reimbursed for travel and expenses for travel for that. But that's very different than taking money to help somebody who's in a desperate situation. You know what I mean?
That was one of the first things I read in a paranormal book when I was a younger man full of hopes and dreams, that the best way you can tell between a charlatan and someone who's legit is simply if they ask you for money.
Right.
When somebody comes to your door and says, oh, there's a dark presence hanging around your house, and for $19.95, I might be able to tell you what it is. And for $99.99, I might be able to get rid of it for you. When somebody's like that, you know they're full of shit right off the bat. And that's kind of one of the recurring themes throughout these characters that you meet, where there are certain unnamed, very popular characters on the Travel Channel that can charge whatever they want, and people will pay it because they associate the name with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get random goobers like us who are just, you know, random goobers, you know, international phenomenon or not, you know, there's a couple of us that are consistent. And that's the kind of thing. I think if you start to experience any kind of weird shit, it's hard to put a price on it. You know, the stuff I've seen, you couldn't pay me any amount of money to experience it again. Like, it's not something you understand unless you've kind of been there. And I think that a lot of times when people seek help with this, they're very afraid for that same reason. You know, whether it's fear of ridicule or anything like that. Or they think, oh, this is a serious problem. It's going to cost me an arm and a leg to get rid of it. So I think it's extremely important to anybody that's going to investigate stuff, and especially serious shit. Like, I lean very heavily in the Ed and Lorraine direction of demonic hauntings and things like that. You know, that's my personal belief on all of it. I think that there are very powerful demonic and angelic forces at work in the world. And when you meet someone that's in the throes of that, I don't know how you could possibly ask them for money. It's so far beyond that. The primal fear in somebody's eyes, and when they tell you shit like, I haven't slept in 3 weeks because something keeps me up, something keeps knocking, you know, whatever. You know, when I do sleep, I have terrible nightmares and all that kind of stuff. I don't think you could possibly charge them. One of the other ethical things that we're kind of talking about, as far as like the haunted museum effect or anything like that, my opinion is that any kind of haunted museum is a much greater risk than it is a reward. If you were to show people it from a distance, perhaps you'd be okay. But to kind of have people walk through or even like touch stuff, as you know, there are many haunted museums out there. You can go on Facebook Marketplace and find haunted items of anything you want very easily. And it's like, if I really thought that these things were haunted, I would want people to be as far away from that as possible. Even with the educational value, I would think it has limits. Like, if I were going to teach someone about the dangers of smoking, am I going to tell them, hey, smoke a carton of cigarettes and tell me how you feel? And that's how you'll know that it's dangerous. I wouldn't do that. I think that's a little bit irresponsible. I think that's the wrong approach to take. But you immediately have the other side where, as you guys have pointed out, you get people that just straight up think this is all bullshit. And you could tell them anything you want. You could show them pictures, film, scientific evidence. They're still not going to believe it unless they're there for themselves. You kind of got to weigh, how much do I want to convince this person? You know, where do we balance that kind of stuff? And I know that for me, I'm not really interested in convincing people what does or doesn't exist. That's not necessarily ever been, well, it was my aim when I was younger, but it's not necessarily my aim anymore. Like, I'm not trying to find compelling video evidence of the paranormal or things like that. Because the best, clearest footage in the world, people still won't believe it. So I think you just have to be careful with it. For lack of a better term, it's very cliche and very generic, but you have no idea what it is that you're dealing with. And as someone pointed out before about opening doors or any kind of door imagery, the door image I like when dealing with any kind of, you know, malevolent spirit, any kind of attachment, it's like driving down the highway. You know, you got the windows cracked, and as you're driving, a fly comes into the window, and now he's in the cab of the car, and you're doing everything. You open the windows wide, and that son of a bitch gets stuck to the window, like, and he will not fly out no matter what you try to get him to do. And once the fly is in the car, it's so hard to get it to leave. And even if it does leave, how long is it until the next fucking fly comes in? And that's kind of how I think of all those kind of things. So what was said earlier about how when you open the door, it always leaves that impression of the door no matter how many times you close it. It reminds me a lot of stuff that's in the Bible where Jesus is tempted by Satan and the devil appears to him and he's saying all this stuff to Jesus, like, if you worship me, all that kind of stuff, you know. And Jesus drives him away. And it tells us in the text that the devil departed from him for a time. And we all know that he will eventually return. Even Jesus himself can't just tell the devil leave. Because like any kind of temptation, like any kind of our tendencies, any of our sins, I guess you could say, any kind of malevolent energy will kind of come in waves. It'll fluctuate, where it'll have highs and lows. And some highs and lows are obviously longer than others, but it's never static. It's never a one and done kind of deal. And it always will keep popping up in one form or another.
Well, since we're talking about the ethics of it, does anybody have any, even if it's out of the box things, I mean, voice it out there. What could we, and then it's not even just necessarily just us, but what could we benefit from, putting more time, investment, education into the paranormal society? What does everybody think that we could, benefit from it? Do you think that we could, in some way, shape, or form, create like a database, and so you could, take certain events and maybe pinpoint using a database like what is necessarily like the problem, maybe what the source is, how to deal with it, what it could mean? Or do you think this is like something that we may even soon discover, like, okay, this is just the next step in life? We can learn how we can approach it and kind of have a higher standing in that sense? Or, I mean, we can even go as crazy as it could, doing more research into paranormal, could we maybe open up a door to paranatural and find out there's different dimensions? Does anybody have any kind of play in on that?
I'm down for making the database. Just gonna say that.
Yeah, the first thing I was thinking was like a taxonomic key for ghosts. So it's like, does it knock in
To link
3?
everybody's experiences too, like when one crime occurs and you get the fingerprint from that, and then you connect somebody from a crime all the way over here and their fingerprint from that. Same thing, but with paranormal. That's brilliant. Good job,
I'm
Amanda.
Pat.
I didn't even think.
Yeah.
And I'm kidding.